this whole Epstein thing, right? It's so crazy. And everyone's trying to look at the millions of files that have been dropped, and then more files get dropped. And then everyone's grabbing little snippets of information and posting it out online. And it's messy and it's overwhelming. What are you saying?
I think all the focus is on the sexual exploitation, but there's not much focus on the economic structure and the elites and, I guess, the spider's web arrangements.
Yeah.
That's the things that really interest me, because from a geopolitical perspective, like we'll get into it towards the end of the show, but just obviously this week with Lord Mandelson, that's huge. And so understanding and unpacking those implications from a global perspective it's wow.
It's wow, right? And then you've got sort of from the New Zealand point of view, mainstream media are still trying to pin Trump as being part of Epstein's crew. That's kind of their angle. And then you've got people that don't trust mainstream media anymore, mostly, I think, in New Zealand, are focusing on the pedophilia and the satanic ritual abuse, which is absolutely there. But, I mean, I've been looking at Epstein probably for about a year just on the side when I've seen the chatter online. In fact, I posted something back when everyone was saying to Trump, release the Epstein files, release the Epstein files. And I posted something about it. And straight away, someone that followed me on X was like, hey, Penny, look a bit deeper into that. And then I did. And actually, when I was over in Washington last year in September, October, I really noticed it. Obviously, you know, it's the Trump administration's in, and there was all this, all these posters on the sides of the roads, like on the lamp posts, and you could tell that they were put out as Democratic propaganda, and it was, you know, Trump released the Epstein files. So that narrative has come from the Democrats. Release the Epstein files, release the Epstein files, because they've built this thing in the psyche of people worldwide to say, if the reason that the Epstein files are not being released is because Trump is implicated as a pedophile. That's what they're trying to say, right? So they've whipped up this whole thing worldwide. And now, finally, and I do believe now that there's many, many reasons why they've been dropped at this time. And hopefully it means that there's a whole lot of the work that we're hoping needs to get done is actually already done or in place, right? But the reality is, it's not just about the pedophilia.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously it's timestamped pretty well, like Trump going back to 2006, like he engaged federal agents around his suspicions, and that's on the record. And it's interesting that it's only sort of just come out in the latest drop of files, because if you look at it, like you kind of question, why wouldn't have he brought this information forward earlier? But I think it's an overall strategic play in terms of the timeliness of the whole midterm election as we run up to November. Yeah. It's going to be interesting how this all just sort of plays out.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. And I was a real Trump skeptic, right? Actually, right up until Tulsi Gabbard released the Russia hoax documents. And at that moment, I was like, hold the phone. At some point, we've got to decide that we are going to try and trust someone or some people who look like they're doing the right thing. So on that, what you were talking about, shall we just play the first video that we've got? So this is PBD podcast. I think they're based in Florida in the US, and a friend of mine actually works on the show, but we're just going to play a few minutes of what they're talking about here, which pertains to what you were saying about Trump being a whistleblower on Epstein back in 2006.
How close are you guys following the Epstein files? Are you following any of it? A little bit? You have some thoughts on it? Let me cover a couple of it. All right. We have to do it anyway. We have to cover it because a couple of things came out. Okay, so two stories. One is Trump told Palm Beach office chief, thank goodness you're stopping Epstein, called Ghislaine Maxwell evil in 06, phone call, FBI document. This is New York Post. Rob, is that a video or what is it that you have here?
This is from the actual Epstein files. The highlighted portion talks about Trump contacting, I believe his name was Michael Ryder, which was the chief of police for Palm Beach Police Department. They were the ones investigating the 2006 charges against Epstein.
So what does it say in there that you're highlighting?
Trump said Maxwell was Epstein's operative. She is evil, and to focus on her, Trump was one of the very first people to call when people found out that they were investigating Epstein. This is from October 18th of 2019, an interview of, I believe, Michael Ryder, who was the police chief in Palm Beach.
He was a police chief of Palm Beach, and he was a top cop from 01 to 09. And the future president was one of very first people to call when people found out that authorities were investigating Epstein for sex with girls as young as 14, whom he had hired to give him massages. Thank goodness you're stopping him. Everyone has known he's been doing this. Trump was quoted as telling Peter on the call, adding that he got the hell out of there on one occasion when he was around Epstein while teenagers were present. Ryder recounted that Epstein donated $40,000 to the department for the purchase of a machine to review security footages, cut a $90,000 check to buy a fingerprinting machine around the time his first victim came forward, and gave more than others to police scholarship fund for children. Tom, how do you process this information?
So, what's really interesting, either Trump is crazy like a fox or, forgot. How would you, with all the accusation on Trump, if I had this letter that was out there, unless this was classified, but this appears to be a garden variety summary of an interview you would do with the police. And if I'm Trump, why don't I put this out 5 years ago? Guys, I thought he was a creep. I said he thought it was a creep. And by the way, go take a look at my interview I did with the police.
Why do you think?
Yep.
You think he forgot?
I don't think he forgot, or do you just hold it, but there's been so much heat and he wants us to go away. Why didn't he play this card earlier, unless the FBI, as part of the Epstein investigation, classified the document? Because
I was going to stop it there. Why do you think that he might have held on to these files when he knew that he was clean, Trump, for so many years?
I think it is where we are in the political timetable, and also there's, it's like the Watergate 2.0. We're on the precipice of something pretty big here.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of where we are in the political cycle, we've obviously seen the ongoings in what's happening in the UK with Starmer and Lord Mandelson. I think it's all very, very strategic behind the GOP. They're getting advice on that, and I think moving forward to the end of the year, I think we're going to see some big things drop.
Yeah, well, obviously, because it's, we've got the midterms, and then from New Zealand's point of view, we've got our election. And I agree with you. I think I sort of watch what a lot of the state departments and things are dropping now, like on X. There, if you want to look at stuff, just follow all of the main departments in the US. So they've got their own X channels, and they're all in sync with what they're doing. I feel really excited because I'm seeing a chess game being played out. And to me, the drop of the Epstein files, the timing of it is critical. And even the fact that I think a whole lot of them dropped like the day before the Grammys, and then they had the Grammys, which was clearly a satanic ritual, and then you had Nicki Minaj there with Trump calling them all out. So I actually am now I feel more at peace when I feel like what we're seeing is a massive strategy of the timing of the drops to play out. I hope that a lot of the the criminal charges and things, they're all going to be in line. Like, I don't want to sit here and I don't want to sit there and be angry online going, where are the arrests? Where are the arrests? Because, and we'll talk about it soon, but they're starting to happen. Like, you can't even keep up with the amount of information that this is pushing out, right? So there's the sexual stuff, and then we're going to look more at the financial stuff.
Yeah, the strategy around the sex exploitation is obviously taking a front seat to the whole case. But I think the whole geopolitical financial institution, which we'll touch on, that's something that's kind of being missed to a degree. The focus from the media, mainstream media, is mainly directly on the sex exploitation acts, and that'll be interesting how that landscape plays out over the next wee while.
Yeah. And so for me, I've been prolifically posting on X over the last couple of weeks, really, just to try and get information out. And of course, there's a lot of information, but really what I'm trying to do is just put stuff on the record that I can refer back to. But we're just going to look at a bit of stuff now from the Rouche organization. So this is a group that I've been following for probably the last 2 or 3 years. So if people aren't following them, you can look them up. So they do a daily drop of information with Harley Schlinger mostly, and they're about 15 minutes long. So they're one of the organizations based in America, but they're global, which has been dropping, and they're connected with the Executive Intelligence Review, a lot of historical stuff about, the geopolitical landscape and things like that. Back in November, Harley Schlinger here did a video in which he was talking about Epstein, and he offered that if you emailed him privately, he'd send you the documents that he'd published. So I did that, and we're going to look at one of them soon. But this is actually one, we're just going to listen to the first part of the video. This is only from a day ago, but from when we're recording this. So this is just a little bit about what he's saying to keep up to date.
Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the Rouche organization with your daily video update for February 13th, 2026. Today, I'm going to be discussing the ongoing Epstein affair. I've been getting numerous calls as I've just published the part 3 of What Was Jeffrey Epstein Really? And it's becoming more clear as each of these email drops are coming out with more and more documents that we were right from the beginning. That this is not about Epstein as a sexual pervert, although that's a part of who he was. And it's more about the environment and the culture in which he was allowed to operate, not just as a collector and abuser of young women and girls, but as a financial genius, so-called, who is part of the transformation of the physical economy of humanity from a production process for sustaining human life to instead a control process of an imperial power. That is the power of the oligarchy of the City of London. Now, I was watching earlier a bit of an interview that he did with Steve Bannon. Bannon apparently has many, many hours of talks with Epstein. And you see Bannon feeding his ego, talking about what a financial genius he is. But here's the point. He was no financial genius. He was playing with the money of the house. He was an operative set up by organized crime, and organized crime that had taken over sections of the so-called legitimate financial community. And if he lost money, it was no problem. It could be written off. If he made money, it was deployed for the sake of continuing the control of the existing establishment over governments and over people. The whole idea of the Great Reset was the idea of central banks as private institutions running the world economy in a financial dictatorship based on policies not determined by elected governments, but by technocrats who answer to the corporate cartels and their billionaire owners. That's what Epstein was all about.
What do you want to say about that?
I think he's bang on the money, Harvey. He's obviously looked beyond the headlines and sort of delved a lot deeper into especially the financial structures that, Epstein, the whole spider's web, frankly, of the financial arrangements, and from him coming from handling managed funds and, going up the food chain relatively quickly over a 4-year period and dropping out of, I think it was in some institution in Indiana at the time. It's just mind-blowing how he's got to a point where in 2019, obviously when he passed, that he somehow acquired $588 million of net assets. And when you track it back through time, there's just so many unanswered questions, and we're still, what are we, 6 years on from it now, and we're still finding out things as time goes by. But I feel like it's reaching a point, Penny, that we're almost there, and I just think that the timing of this all is a real strategic play from the administration in the States right now.
It's like the house of cards is falling down, right? Because the administration in America have got hold of these documents and now they're releasing them. I think that they've had to release them to the public in order for the public to believe what they're looking at, because they can't, because Trump derangement syndrome is so crazy. And then I guess the question comes back to, like, why are you and I sitting here today doing this in little old New Zealand? Like, how does this apply to us?
Yeah, absolutely. You touch on a good point. For me, it's about the political construct in terms of the corruption that we've seen happening on New Zealand shores, and it's sort of opening up a wider conversation and a wider picture around what's actually happening out there in a geopolitical sense, but also understanding that there's correlations to, Epstein here on New Zealand shores. And as we sort of lead up to our own election in November, that I know that we've got some stuff downstream to share in that respect. It's going to be interesting as far as how this all sort of plays out.
Yeah, because some people would say that what's going on in America isn't directly impacting us. What's been shown with Epstein is obviously how embedded it is into the British and the geopolitical system worldwide, which of course includes us. How can it not? We're just going to go and look at a document where it talks about the Five Eyes nations, and so we're obviously part of that. So what happened back in November, just to take you back, was he put this video out as one of his daily updates, and this was actually the email. So he was saying, here is what mainstream media isn't telling you about Jeffrey Epstein. As disgusting and depraved as his treatment of girls and young women was, his lack of morals characterized his role in shaping the transformation of the US financial system, enriching corrupt establishment figures at the expense of the American people. Well, not just the American people, but all around the world. So I'm just going to go to the next document, which is, so when Harley was talking about these documents that he had dropped, this was the first one of the series, and he just dropped the third one. We're just going to read through little parts of this. So this is what was Jeffrey Epstein really? Harley Schlanger, who you just saw. So I'm just going to read out some stuff, and then we can just have a chit-chat about it. So November 6 last year, if you were perplexed by the Epstein case, why, for example, more than 6 years after his death in a federal prison cell in New York City, there are still more questions than answers about the life and death despite an intense media focus on him. There is a simple reason for this. The truth about him has been hidden by a sophisticated strategy to cover up who and what he was, to protect those who used him to carry out their efforts to sustain and advance their global empire. Their strategy was simple. Once one knows it, flood the public with as many titillating details of wealth, celebrity, power, and corruption as possible, while never permitting a glimpse at who benefits from his activities and what was and remains their goal. The more salacious and degraded the package, the less attention the public pays to the actual content.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, to obviously unpack this, it's a massive spider's web arrangement. And so he's bang on there in terms of, like, you know, there's so much information. It's so hard to actually go to sources and sort of, I guess, digest it all.
Yeah.
It's really difficult. In terms of the research leading up to today, it's been quite hard to actually unpack, and you find yourself going on to other topics and going off on a tangent.
1,000 different rabbit holes.
So many. But yeah, I think the focus, like, as we keep continuing to point out, is around the financial side of things, where I think, like, it's there to a degree, but it's not as high profile as one would have thought.
Yeah, and I sort of think the reason why I want to do this is to show people, like, and I know, and even part of the girls in my team are looking at, like, the documents and what's coming out in the files, particularly around the trans stuff and all that, because that pertains to the work that I normally look at. When I, read out what I just read there, what it highlights to me is how to explain to people why they don't know this is because the media is all controlled. And when the media is all controlled and they're not going to talk about it, that's why, if you look at the New Zealand Herald and Radio New Zealand and all of that, they'll just drop these little tidbits where they're trying to paint Trump in a bad light, so therefore you're not going to look at anything that he says or his people say. But they're also only focusing on the sexual stuff. And I'm not undermining the importance of having to deal with that, but there is more to it than that. And that's what this is really saying, is that they put all the salacious stuff out because it grabs people's attention. And I'm always like, but what's actually happening over here that people aren't looking at? So I'll just read a little bit more. Epstein lived in the shadowy world of the deep state and the secret of the secret government, whose beneficiaries use tools of hybrid warfare, including censorship, narrative control, and sometimes outright thuggery to remain in the shadows. For those readers who might be skeptical about the existence of a deep state, thinking that it exists only in the mind of a conspiracy theorist with an overheated imagination, perhaps this report on the real Jeffrey Epstein will enable you to overcome the delusional state which rejects the idea that a hidden power wielded by real people is capable of controlling not only what people know, but how they think. And I think that's really important because, and it's funny, my little Penny Marie slogan is think you're invited. What the media, if they were ethical, should be doing is getting people to start thinking, but they're not. They're framing things in a way that gets people having the hive mind, which is why we're dealing with Trump derangement syndrome, right? They're not thinking, they're just reacting. And when people are in a reactive state, they're not really analysing things critically. And that's exactly the apparatus that they've used over all these years to hide what's really going on, because too many people are implicated. Too many systems that we rely on, like our financial system and our political system and our media system, they're all implicated in this, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, just to think, with the obviously the allegations or the findings that have come out this week in the UK, this is just the tip of an iceberg, right?
Yeah.
There's a heck of a lot more to come, and anyone that's naive to think that New Zealand's not tied up in all of this, I think hold the phone. Definitely, as we move towards the election, I think there's definitely more stuff to come on this, and it's going to be, hold your breath.
I think what worries me the most, I mean, the media is being exposed as not being reliable, and less people. I think the people that trust the media in New Zealand is now down to 28% or something like that. And so we need more independent people like us just coming out with the receipts and the commentary and our analysis of it to get people thinking. But what worries me the most is the lack of integrity within the justice system. So that's what I believe that they're struggling with over in America when people are saying, why aren't there more arrests? Well, my understanding is that a lot of the judiciary over there in the different states are corrupt themselves. So they've got to let people see with these documents that are dropping who's corrupt so that we can shake these people out. They've got to be dealt with themselves. But how do you deal with them if the whole system is corrupt? The whole justice system is corrupt.
You touch on a great point. I mean, we all know he avoided the federal charges, which could have resulted in decades in prison, frankly, in 2006. The agreement granted immunity to unnamed conspirators, shielding potential enablers from prosecution, and he only served the 13 months in county jail, but he also received work release privileges, left jail for extended hours, 6 days a week.
Yeah, he could work from home, I think, couldn't he, in the day?
Yeah, it's absolutely insane that, a person of, I guess, relative obscurity at the start can be afforded these privileges. And
where it hits on to what we're literally dealing with in New Zealand is the likes of the Jevon McSkimming situation, where the Deputy Commissioner of Police gets a really light sentence when he's allegedly had bestiality images on his computer. And we're seeing high-profile people with a lot of money who are getting charged with sexually explicit stuff or child abuse things, pedophilia, and they're all getting name suppression. So we're seeing the same thing happening in our justice system here, which is driving people who see what's going on bonkers, because if we can't trust the justice system and if we can't trust the police, how are we ever going to see justice done? And I'm only saying that because I do choose to believe that enough people in America will get hold of the truth, and I mean the people on the ground, to demand justice. I think that's why the files have been released in the way they are, because I think that the administration have probably done everything they can. Now they need the people en masse to lobby their own state, attorneys and things like that, and actually get the truth out. And I think that I'm not trying to say that all of these files are going to show anything specifically about the New Zealand justice system, but we're seeing the same pattern. We're seeing the pattern of, if you're rich enough, if you're influential enough, and if you're in a high enough position, you get name suppression and you get off with a slap on the wrist.
A free pass.
Right? And the people of New Zealand, I mean, the reason that more people are not enraged in New Zealand is because mainstream media is not telling the story the way that it needs to be told. And how do people like us, with little or no budget and not much reach, get the word out? But it is up to the people to hold them to account. And I think we need to take a leaf out of the American administration's books as far as how they're trying to bypass the media, call out the media. If you go on the White House website now, there's actually a page where they're actually calling out the media lies when the media is lying about them. Like, we have to just get really bold about this now. It's not okay that we're being lied to by the systems that are trying to protect their own people. There's another part of this document that we wanted to look at, which was, and it's only in sense of bringing this back to New Zealand. So what he says over here is, as we'll show in this article, the perpetrators of this transformation are financial and intelligence operatives centred in the City of London, committed to maintaining an empire in collaboration with Anglophiles from Wall Street. This London-directed establishment is a criminal enterprise which includes officials of major intelligence agencies such as the Five Eyes and the Mossad, with a long history of wet works when necessary from both the military establishment and organised crime networks, the latter of which are fully integrated with the financial establishment of the City of London. Now, I'll just say here that you and I are not experts, but we're just providing commentary from the information that we're looking at. But we all know that New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes network, right? So for people that are thinking that this stuff doesn't relate to us, they need to know that it does, and we're right in the thick of it with our ties with the UK and the City of London and all of the financial system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, even the connections with Mossad and the connection with Ghislaine Maxwell and her family, it's just such a spider's web to unpack, isn't it? Like, there's so many connections, and you can get buried in the headlines, and it's easy enough to do. I'm guilty of it.
Yeah.
But it's about stripping it back and actually understanding what's the whole overall strategy of the release of these files and the timeliness of it. There's a definite strategy.
Yeah, there's a definite strategy. And you're right, going back to what that first video that we showed, which was where Trump was saying in 2006, look at Maxwell, like Maxwell's the key. And so that's the connection into Mossad. Her and her dad were connected into Mossad, and lots of other channels talk about that when I'm not the expert in that side of it. It's just trying to bring it back into what's relevant to New Zealand. I just want to pull up Liberty Sentinel. So this is a Substack from Alex Newman. So he's a conservative commentator in America, personally known to some of the people in my network around the kids stuff. So he posted this just the other day, a couple of days ago. UN Master Plan for Humanity tied to Epstein network, climate agenda and global control push. So this is just another interesting angle on things, which I think is really important, because the whole climate hoax situation, which Trump is calling out, which no politicians here in New Zealand and no mainstream media are willing to touch. My guess is because so much money and power is tied up in it, but we'll get to that one day, eh, Jamie? So this is what he said too. Epstein's role went far beyond sex scandals. He served as a conduit connecting political figures, financial dynasties, academic institutions and multinational corporations, yet the media is silent. And what I want to just call out here, because this is kind of my wheelhouse, is, I talk a lot with the kids stuff around the United Nations. So he says here, the United Nations so-called Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, are being sold to the public as a benign effort to end hunger, poverty and disease. But as Alex Newman explained in a recent interview with Children's Health Defence, the SDGs are nothing less than the latest iteration of an 80-year-old project to consolidate global power under unelected international bureaucracies, a master plan for humanity, as UN leaders themselves described it in 2015. So then he talks about the disturbing network of elites and institutions advancing this agenda and the emerging evidence linking convicted sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein to key elements of the operation, including within the Trilateral Commission from as far back as the 1990s. Pretty crazy stuff. So this all goes back to what used to be called conspiracy theorists about the Rockefellers, right?
Then we go beyond that, obviously, back to the generation before, and yeah, it's just understanding the scale of what's actually what we was confronted with us at the moment. And I know I do keep repeating this, but there's so much more to come.
Yeah,
and it seems like it's the dam's about to burst. And we're going to sort of have more of an idea as to where this is going to sit in a few months' time.
Now would probably be a good time to say, if people out there who are listening to this have information that they want to share, and if they don't want to be named, then they can get hold of us, because we're keen to have a look at it, because we're commentating. But there will be people in New Zealand who will know things in this sort of space, in this dark space, who may not know where to go to. And so go to us or anyone else that you trust in independent media, probably not mainstream media, because they'll likely bury the story. And also that if people are liking what you're watching, please like and subscribe and share this. So you were just mentioning before about how this goes back before Jeffrey Epstein. Like, he didn't just come up with this on his own, right? So he got involved in 1976, which you're going to talk about a little bit later about his timeline of his acceleration from where he started from to how quickly he got to being at the top of a very large pile of corruption. But when I was over in Washington in September, October last year, what we were actually doing was speaking outside the World Health Organization, and we went into Congress to pitch to Congress people to reopen, to look at a bill that tried to get passed 30 years ago in Congress to investigate a man called Alfred Kinsey. And so this is connected, and I just want to play this 3-minute clip from Rhonda Miller. So she's from an organization, a grassroots organization like Let Kids Be Kids over in Indiana, and they have been researching Alfred Kinsey for years, and so she ties together Alfred Kinsey as the previous generation to Epstein. So we'll just watch this.
My name is Rhonda Miller. I'm the CEO of Purple for Parents United. I'm a former Hoosier, where in the heartland, Alfred Kinsey set up camp. Alfred Kinsey didn't work alone, just like Jeffrey Epstein didn't work alone. Alfred Kinsey was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Rockefeller family. He was protected by the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. He was given access to mental health hospitals where he was able to perform some of his sex experiments. He had a wealth of pedophiles that he was working with. There were also, the whole network was funded by the Rockefellers. This money is the same kind of money that funded Jeffrey Epstein. So while the world is focused on Jeffrey Epstein, we're helping people realize that there was a precursor to Jeffrey. His name was Alfred Kinsey. Indiana, unfortunately, did not hold him responsible. They gave him safe haven. They covered up for him from the 1940s on down. Every governor, every legislature covered for him. Not only was he covered by the state government, he was also covered by the federal government, because there were multiple efforts to have his organization and his institute investigated. And as typical, the government shut it down. The same government that is protecting Jeffrey Epstein. Let that sink in. In 1995, there was an effort to have the institute investigated. Unfortunately, our government failed to do so. They once again provided cover for Alfred Kinsey, the CIA, and the Rockefeller Foundation. It is time, 30 years later, to finally have the institute investigated. Because had our government done that, the United States government, children around the world would not be paying the price. The individuals here today represent multiple nations. They're going to talk about the damage that's been done to their children because the United States of America did not take action and stop the grooming of children. The grooming of children leads into an explosion of pornography and child sex trafficking. That is what we're seeing President Donald Trump, fight and try to take down. We stand with him, and we ask him to have the Institute investigated. The Kinsey Institute serves as ground zero in the heartland in Bloomington, Indiana, for what we are seeing play out around the world. Our children are being perverted, they're being trafficked, and they are being mutilated by John Money's efforts in transgender surgeries. So we are here today to say we've had enough, and we ask you all to join us as we call on the investigation of the Kinsey Institute, and we stop the perversion through the World Health Organization and the United Nations.
So this is what happens when you've got corruption right in there at state legislation level, right? 30 years ago, a bill was tried to go through Congress to investigate this pedophilic propaganda. So Alfred Kinsey was the forerunner to Hugh Hefner. And Hugh Hefner came after him, and then they basically created this whole sexual revolution, which is based on pedophile data. And then you've got Jeffrey Epstein now, who's been involved in this stuff since the 70s. So I just wanted to show that this is how hard it is for the people who, when they find out how corrupt things are and how sexually perverted things are, we can't get justice because the corruption's gone all the way to the top. So when we were in, Washington, we went to Congress and we were trying to get them to see this. Now, we sort of feel like we've got one shot, which is to look at this and try and get people who get it on our side while Trump's people are in. And that comes back to what you were talking about before about how we're in this year where it's the midterms coming up. So what do you want to say about this sort of your area of passion is looking into what needs to flow for there to be common sense prevail when the midterms happen later this year?
I think they really need to strip it back and go back to the, like you mentioned, 76 with Bear Stearns and, how Epstein rose from a junior assistant limited partner. I think they've really got to strip it back to that point and understand where this all come from, where it all begun, because deep beneath those covers, there's just so much stuff that doesn't add up about this, whether it's like founding the Intercontinental IAG, whether it's later working with Hoffenberg at Tower Financial Corporation and the merger, the Ponzi scheme, that he was involved with the $450 million in 93 that he got off and wasn't even charged in relation to fraud. It's just, and then established J. Epstein and Co. managing wealth for the ultra wealthy clients. I mean, the key financial figures are obviously Les Wexner. He's one of the main key financial people that was involved with Epstein, and I guess his connections, that's something that isn't really talked about in depth. And how did this origin of this relationship, yes, it is publicized out there, but understanding what we've been through over the last 100 odd years, where does this all lead to? There's so much that hasn't been published yet at this point. And
it's going to take years, to get our heads around it. But I hope that what they're going to do is grab the snakes at the top. Shall we look now at the Lord Mandelson stuff?
Great.
So you and I I've been watching Promethean Action for, I don't know, maybe a year now, I would like to say. And I put you onto it recently, I put everyone onto it that is communicating with me intelligently on X, because these ladies do, I would say, well, from what I have found, some of the best commentary on trying to get people to understand what I have come to understand is that there are two American systems. There is the American system of economics, which goes back to Hamilton, back years and years ago. And then there have been different presidents that have come in over the time that have tried to reinitiate the American system of economics, which is actually pro-development through economic policy and reform to get industries up and running and to put your investment back into the people of your country. Would that be a fair sort of layman's terms?
Absolutely. Like going pre-1970s in the Rust Belt, Sun Belt areas, like your rural parts of Pennsylvania, getting back to those, that's a big part of Trump's policies leading into midterm, is trying to get those areas, booming, because obviously they've suffered a lot of time. Small town Pennsylvania, small town rural Indiana, they've all suffered from the reforms, over the last 50 odd years. So there's a big focus there, but I feel what's getting buried beneath is the GOP candidates out on the ground. There's a bit of a disconnect with Trump's vision. They actually need to understand how they got there and why they're there.
Yeah, I
think that's another conversation in itself, but I think the format of policy and the suite of policy that he'd like to roll out, that he has rolled out, I think he's heading in the right direction, and it'll be interesting to see whether that resonates with the people on the ground, because at the moment it is pretty challenging, because as we've seen in Texas, there's been a few seats fall to the Democrats in recent weeks. So he's up against it, but Promethean Action are doing God's work, frankly. Like, they are out there promoting facts, promoting policy, and stripping all the jargon associated with mainstream media narrative and actually stripping it back to actually understand. So encourage people out there, listeners, to actually take some time to listen to these ladies. They're doing some fabulous work.
Yeah, they really are. And to me, it's consolidating what I understand about the original system of economics in America, which keeps being infiltrated and broken down by what they call the British, which is the oligarchical Rothschilds, however far back you want to call it. People are like, how far back do you want to go? How far back do you want to go? But they talk about it as far as the British establishment, which is really the whole Epstein, City of London, all of that. But when you talk about economic policy, and again, I'm no economist, but the economic policy that our country is under is like most of the West, which is enslaving people right now. And I drive around the country and I see that the small towns like what you're talking about in America, where's the development going on? And yet Trump's policies, and it's what Charlie Kirk talked about, is they want to rebuild America back to the point where a family can afford to live off one salary.
Mm.
That makes so much sense to me as far as families. Children, children are getting raised by the state now because mum and dad have to go out and work a couple of different jobs. Parents are not then in touch with what's going on at school. So then schools are running off, putting ideological stuff in kids' heads, and mum and dad don't know because they're juggling mortgages and all of that. So a lot of that social decline and that family decline, to me, now that I'm sort of looking at it from the 10,000-foot view, it comes down to sound economic policy, which is establishing something where we're not just slaving away night and day just to pay the basic necessities of life, because that's really where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, the standard of living, there's no doubt about it, over the last 50 years it's been mission creep, hasn't it? You just touched on it, mum and dad are not only working together collectively, they're working longer and harder, and simply their money's not going far enough. And that's the reality of it. And then you do get that disconnect from a family perspective where you don't, mum's not as connected with their children as they grow up through pre-educational, like kindergarten and through to high school. It's really important to get back to those old school values. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but certainly with some structure and policy in place, we can sort of, push back against the tide, because the tide is just, it's like a tsunami at the moment, frankly. People just can't even afford to pay for bread and milk and butter, and it's almost like a luxury going to a cafe on a Sunday to have something to eat. You feel like you've had a treat. It's like having a roast lamb on a Sunday these days, where it was quite common going back, 30 years ago, that just was the normality, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it was you that was saying to me the other day, like, what a Sunday roast is going to set you back about $50. Like, families can't afford that anymore. And so that's why this conversation that Promethean Action brings is so important, because it's explaining that there are two systems at war with each other in America, and what the Trump is trying to get done. Now, he's held up because most people in America, well, I can't say most people, because actually he got voted in. This is a crazy thing. Like, it was too big to rig, all the election rigging, and he won anyway. So the American people know that they needed something to change, but where it hurts people and where it's hurting our people is in their back pocket. So it all comes down to what is a good lifestyle for people. Do they want to be working 3 jobs just to pay the rates? So anyway, with that, because I could go on about forever, but we'll just listen to a couple of minutes of Susan Kokinder here from Promethean Action, because it brings it back into sort of the British sphere of things with Epstein, which then pertains to New Zealand.
Thanks to the latest Epstein dump, we now know who the banker's inside man in Britain was during and after the 2008 financial crash. Here's the most important snippet from the latest document dump. It's about Lord Peter Mandelson, and here's how Jeffrey Epstein describes him. Well, for all intents and purposes, Petey is now acting deputy prime minister. What was Jeffrey Epstein, who was in jail when that was written, and Lord Peter Mandelson doing in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crash? Remember, these discussions are going on while the bankers are being bailed out and the global financier elite are being saved. But instead of that story, here's what you're being inundated with. Now, if you read the TDS-infected press like The Guardian, you'll see headlines like, Trump News at a Glance, Epstein Files Release Shows Emails with Trump Officials, Past and Present. Or on the other side of the political spectrum, Fox News focuses on new Epstein documents include photos of Bill Clinton, shirtless in hot tub, socializing with Michael Jackson. Or if you want to go hardcore British psyops, The Telegraph says, Epstein's links to Putin and Kremlin spies raise fears he was a Russian agent. Now, here's what they don't want you to think about. The 2008 financial crisis was never really solved. The banks got bailed out at the expense of the American taxpayers and the economy. And now Donald Trump is finally taking down that criminal free trade system of the global bankers. On the very same day these new Mandelson revelations came out, Donald Trump was busy dismantling what is left of that old world order with dramatic new economic moves, including the creation of a strategic critical minerals reserve. Now, if you think this is a coincidence, you haven't been paying attention. And most important, it's not about sex and blackmail. I'm Susan Kokinda, and for months, I've been telling you that the big reveal in the Epstein files was about Peter Mandelson and how it had more to do with the 2008 financial collapse and the banker's empire than it did plane trips to an island.
When this obviously dropped, how old is this, Penny? 10 days ago, isn't it?
Yep.
We've seen headlines start to reach our mainstream media, haven't we? Keir Starmer's under pressure. Geopolitically, there's obviously a lot of tension around this. And it just speaks to, what don't we know at the moment? This is only a tip of the iceberg, isn't it? You've got a guy who's the ambassador from the UK, ambassador to the US, and you've got a guy who's served under Gordon Brown and was instrumental in his exit. And, it's just mind-blowing to think that this can stretch across to the UK. And if it isn't just them, who else is involved?
Well, that's it. And I think this is where, when she talks about what the mainstream media are trying to make everybody stay focused on the sex scandal. So when Mandelson, he was the UK ambassador to America, when he left his post, the media will make it out that it's just about the sex scandal. And that's actually the diversion, right? Because it's actually about the financial situation, which, when I watch this, you go back to the global financial crisis of 2008, and we all can remember that and how hard that was.
High interest rates.
Oh, yeah, it was really tough. Redundancies, we all struggled with that. And it's actually like people need to realize that this was created by these people. It's all wealth transfer away from the people, away from the working class, away from people like us, and into their pockets. And COVID's exactly the same. COVID was the largest wealth transfer in history, I think. And then they have us all looking at, oh my gosh, and mask wearing and standing 2 meters apart and all down here and looking at this. They're laughing at us. This is a wealth transfer going on. And not only are these people getting more wealthy than they even know what to do with, but they're sex criminals as well.
Mm.
People have to get really mad about this, right?
I feel like there's an underbelly of it's all going to reach a point where I guess people are actually starting to wake up now 5-6 years on from COVID, and they're starting to actually be, I guess, not as patient with things from a government perspective. And obviously you touched on mainstream media. The confidence in mainstream media is at an all-time low, around 32%.
Yeah.
There's so many people here on shore politically homeless. Like I talk to so many people on the street and that, and they just don't even know where, what, how.
Yeah, who's not corrupt?
Yeah, exactly.
Who's not hiding anything?
Exactly. And
we don't have the answers, by the way. We're asking the questions.
Absolutely.
Hey.
And trying to educate people out there to understand that there's a broader context of what's actually going on. It's not look beneath the covers, look beneath the headlines. There's other stuff going on that they probably don't, they don't want you to know, frankly.
Yeah, whatever they don't want you to know, look under that rock. Yeah. I'm just going to play another bit because you wanted to talk about this next bit that's in the same video from 10 days ago.
So the real big casualty of this latest dump is Lord Peter Mandelson, the former British ambassador to the United States who had the assignment of trying to manage Donald Trump. That didn't work out so well. His was one of the first heads to roll in the first Epstein file release. He was forced to resign as ambassador. But now this new file dump has forced Mandelson to resign both from the Labour Party and to leave his seat in Parliament. And a few minutes ago, this headline just dropped: how King Charles could strip Mandelson of his peerage. Now, to the extent the American press has even mentioned Mandelson's resignations, they portray it as another disgusting episode in the world of jet-setting perverts. But that's only the subplot. They don't want you to look at the main storyline. Mandelson wasn't just socializing with Epstein. He was a top-level policy operative embedded in the British government, and the new files show devastating evidence that in 2009 and 2010, right in the middle of the financial crisis, Mandelson was leaking highly sensitive government information to Jeffrey Epstein. We're talking about advanced knowledge on bailouts and asset sales. Epstein was providing his clients with more than sexual services. Epstein was the fixer. Mandelson was the inside man. Remember, here's what Epstein told Ghislaine Maxwell in June 2009. That little Petey, which was his actual nickname for Mandelson, was, for all intents and purposes, practically the deputy prime minister. The real story is about policy. Perversions are the tool of the trade. So here's a few of the highlights of what little Petey did for Epstein. In June of 2009, he sent him a Downing Street memo on a £20 billion asset sale and said, interesting note that's just gone to the prime minister. 2 months later, he leaked a confidential banking memo 4 seconds after receiving it. In May of 2010, he tipped off about a 500 billion Eurozone bailout, saying, this should be announced tonight, just leaving number 10. And on May 10th, he gave Epstein advance notice of Gordon Brown's resignation. The prime minister finally got him to go today. But it gets worse. Mandelson wasn't just leaking, he was fixing. In one of the newly released files, Mandelson advises Jamie Dimon, the head of JP Morgan, on the need to mildly threaten the Chancellor of the Exchequer. This is how the post-2008 system actually worked. A network of fixers, bankers, and political operatives, ensuring that governments served financial institutions with bailouts, not national interests. Epstein connected the money, Mandelson opened the doors.
So you got JP Morgan sending threats to Lord Mandelson to obviously pass on to Brown at the time. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
It's unbelievable.
Level.
I'm at the point of believing anything now because there's no end to the depth of the corruption, right?
And for all the listeners out there, some of those financial positions, they may not seem much in those headlines on that screenshot just earlier, but in terms of leverage and with market dips and volatility at Wall Street and all those sorts of things, and obviously the UK, this is all designed. I.e., how you were talking about COVID earlier in that reset, and also the reset back in 2008. This was another reset within a reset, which is kind of flown by, basically untouched, hasn't it, until the last week or so.
Yeah. And
if it isn't just this, what else is actually out there? What else do we not know about in terms of the financial elite out there that are constructing this playbook?
Yep. And then the question comes back to, and what role has New Zealand had in this? Five Eyes was an intelligence network. What information is being sent backwards and forwards in this soup from New Zealand? That's something that I don't see many New Zealand commentators in New Zealand talking about.
I just don't think it's... frankly, they'd more want to discuss social policies and all the facade that's out there. That's our mainstream media.
Yeah.
What's going to improve living standards for us Kiwis is actually talking about the actual things that where the rubber hits the road, your bread and butter, your milk. And I know we bring it back to ground zero with that, but it's all very, very relevant in terms of what's going on. And until the media can start talking out about these issues, unfortunately, New Zealanders are going to continue to suffer. And I guess that's the exciting part where you play a massive part, Penny, shining a lot of light and truth on a lot of situations out there on a geopolitical scale that can actually help educate our public to understand things in a broader context.
Well, I think thanks, and you as well, because hopefully you're going to come back. But the thing is, we don't get to hear and see much of what is going on under the new Trump administration, which has only been in for just over a year. And I just say to people, and I used to have Trump derangement syndrome myself, but I did see it collapse my family, is go and look at the White House website and actually read what they're doing. Because when I look at it on the highest level, it's not dripping in DEI. In fact, they're defunding all of that. It's not dripping in racial tension, which is what New Zealand is, I think, the hottest concern at the moment, is that the powers that be on both sides of the fence have created this racial tension with Māori to fever pitch. So we're all being distracted by really what the problem is, which is exactly what you say. At the end of the day, people are struggling to feed their families. They're looking, people who never had to worry about the price of food are looking twice at the supermarket when it's $20 for a block of cheese. That's where the rubber hits the road for people. That's why a lot of people actually can't look at what we're looking at, because they're actually just worried about surviving, paying the bills. How do we afford these never-ending rates increases? All this stuff about sexual, perversions and things. I can't even look at that because I'm just figuring out how to deal with my child who's giving me problems, So that's where we can sort of sit here and commentate. We'd love to hear from people if you've got more information, if you like what we're doing. Like, I just want to be, we're fully independent. We're not backed by any political party or any financier. I wish we were, but maybe one day we will, and we'd love the people out there to help us with that. But the fact of the matter is there's very few voices in New Zealand that are actually going to look under all the rocks and won't get scared away because they're going to be called racist, or they're going to be called transphobes, or they're going to be called climate deniers. Yeah, like, people are afraid to speak the truth. That's what I hear on the street all the time. And Trump derangement syndrome, boy, you drop that into a conversation, Trump, and you just get your head shot off, really. And I'm not there as a flag waver for him. I'm out there to try and have a conversation. And the more that you aren't allowed to have conversations about certain things, the more that people need to realize that that is the thing that they need to look at, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to the standard of living, like with insurance premiums, with this climate issues that we have had in New Zealand. And then we're hearing from Westpac this week that they're going to hike OCR over the next year, up six times, not 6 basis points, but probably around 1.5%. That just goes straight onto people's mortgages. It's insane. We've just come off high interest rates, and now we're talking about reversing interest rates, and all this geopolitical stuff is deeply connected to all this.
100%.
But what we see in the headline is just Westpac economist says X, Y, Z. And then all of a sudden the narrative builds, and then it's the focus is on our political leaders here.
Yeah.
But it's also international, in terms of how New Zealand are projecting themselves. It's really important moving forward to November that we can put smart policies, economic policies in place. It's going to put this country's best interests at heart first.
Yeah. Yep. And that's again where I look to countries like America and go, well, what do their policies look like in comparison to what we've got? Like when we looked at Liberty Sentinel before and talking about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the connection between that and Epstein, I can't really find policy in New Zealand that isn't connected to that. But the Sustainable Development Goals is a front for its globalism. So it's saying you can't be trusted to make the right policy for your own people. So therefore, here's a policy for you and you have to abide by it. And that's the only way you're going to get funded. So it's all connected into the financial institutions, the ESG scores. That's all, BlackRock, and I do stuff about that all the time. Larry Fink is saying you must comply with our DEI policies in order to get money. Like it's not organic, and it's not being run by people who genuinely have our country's best interests at heart. It's being run by people who are having either their arm twisted up their back financially, or they're getting some kickback from it because Trump's calling out the climate stuff, which is what all the Sustainable Development Goals is around. It's all money. I want to call it money laundering, but it's all misappropriating or moving money to the elite establishment and leaving us with the generational bills.
Frankly,
right? Crumbs, yeah, and debt for our children and our grandchildren, and this is where people do need to start looking beyond their front doors and actually go, what do we want to leave to our children? More debt? This is where Trump's economic policy, I believe, needs to be unpacked in the New Zealand sense. We are a country that's strong in minerals, and we've got so much going on for our country. People tell me we're actually one of the wealthiest countries in the world as far as our resources. So why are more and more people struggling?
Absolutely. We only have to look back to the late 70s, right, and the controversial Think Big policies around the Muldoon government. And therein lies, like, if hand on heart, if people said to you today, back in the 70s, like our parents, was it a good idea back then? Absolutely not. But I'll tell you now, with that infrastructure that was invested back then, would power be a lot higher than it is today? I bet you bottom dollar it would. But people have got this short-term syndrome where they're just thinking about tomorrow. And I get that, but you've also got to balance off the long-term view and the mid-term view for your children, for your grandchildren. And that's really important. And I don't think we've got the balance right in that context. We're still searching for that. We've sort of going a little bit off track, but we've talked about a motorway pass through the Harbour Bridge in Auckland. Those sorts of big ticket items like light rail that Labour campaigned on going out to the airport, those sort of big ticket items are important, but it's actually the timing of that sort of stuff and when it's implemented that really matters. And actually, is it going to shift the needle or is it just money just thrown, frankly, down the toilet?
Well, and also those big infrastructure projects and those fast track projects are funding. They're going to line the pockets of international interests, not New Zealand. They're just going to leave us more in debt. That's a conversation for another day. But this is the thing that people need to look at: is what are the financial implications for people in their houses? People just for their very own families, with all of the stuff that's coming out, where it's clear that there is financial gains going more and more to elites, corrupted elites, and we have to sit and scratch our heads and go, why are we generally getting poorer, and who's generally getting richer out of this, right?
And politicians simply have to ask themselves, how can we get our GDP per capita back up at the levels that it were around the 80s, pre-Rogernomics? We need to get back to that point. How can we actually do that without having sways of immigration come through? Look, I'm not anti-immigration, but we need to be selective around the immigration we have, and we need to get back to the old school values of what made this country great. And I think we're just far from it at the moment, and there doesn't seem to be a political appetite out there. It's all incrementalism. The thing with MMP is that, unfortunately, it just means it's tinkering on the edges, and you don't really get the full reform, like the neoliberal reforms from Roger Douglas in the late 80s. I'm not saying that that was all good, but it's just. But
they were actually able to push the dial. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And I just think that it's like going on a slow boat to China. Like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And we've got so far to go. Yeah.
We just need big thinkers, and, like you say, not little tweaks. Is there anything else that you want to say in wrapping up about what we talked about today?
Well, I've obviously watched a lot of your content, and it's been awesome to connect with you and, to invite me onto the program. I've really enjoyed time, and we have quite a lot in common in terms of, in particular, around the economic policies and the DEI stuff. So I really look forward to sort of connecting with you ongoing, and I've really enjoyed, and thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, it's been awesome having you on, Jamie, and I want our listeners and viewers to let me know whether you want to have Jamie back, because we love talking about stuff, and it's really cool to connect with you because you've got way more of a history of being a sort of a political analyst quietly there for years. I'm quite new at all of this, but it fascinates me, so I really appreciate your time and energy, and for reaching out to me on X about a year ago. Thanks.
Thanks, Penny.
Cheers.